Good afternoon, biology students. This is Mr. Thompson. Today we're going to try a video. So as you watch this after our live prayer and connection, you should be answering the entry task question in the comments section for this video. Please note it's only one comment. Do not reply to somebody else's. Just put your own comment in there. And obvious answers are fine. Just a way to see that you're here at this point. There will also be an exit ticket that you will do at the end of the class. It'll be a short survey with a few questions. So before getting to the target and things for today, a few reminders on here is one, the online discussion yesterday. Overall, I saw a lot of good things in there. I know it's hard to navigate that with a large group of people. A few reminders is that in things like this, I want you to draw from information in class as you make your comments. And if you have specific things you want to bring up, you can start your own conversations, your own threads. I think that'll be a way in the future that we will have specific students that will start a topic and then those will respond from there. But saw a lot of good things. If you are just sending in random one-word comments and saying I agree, it's not a great use of that space. So be able to take some time to make your response. It's not about number, it's about the quality of those things. Also, for tomorrow, I'm encouraged to see that well over half of you are turning your assignment, which is great. You're sending in pictures. You can use that scanner tool that I told you about in class on Monday, or just take a picture and attach it that way, as long as I see it on the team's assignment. Got to be able to see it there. So that could be a screenshot of what you've worked on for those vocab. That could be a picture of your images, whatever it is. I want that up on the team's assignment. And everywhere that I have, every time I have an assignment, that's where it will go. Also, we have our test is almost done. I'll get that back to you. Should have the scores in there by later today. And then if you want individual results back, I can send you a message on there as well. So for right now, I'm going to take a second and I want you to comment. If you've already looked at, comment on one and only one differences between a cell in your skin and that of your blood. Obvious is fine, but think through what's an obvious or not as obvious difference of the cells in your skin and that of your blood. Take a minute to answer that. You can pause the video and then come on back here. Okay. Also note for the homework, I forgot this earlier, is that you're going to just read this segment according to this thing right here, and I put a video on growing organs in the useful video section, and then to make sure you finish your vocab by tonight. So this last time we looked a bit at the specialization of cells, and we talked about the giraffe a little bit in your reading and your response. And the reason I chose this again is I want you to see that this idea of where things came about, what is the argument of evolution and natural selection versus that of intelligence, is present in our textbook. It's present in our world. We'll talk more about this coronavirus, the COVID-19, and how different perspectives on exactly why this came about. And a big part of it has to do with an understanding of genetics, of RNA and DNA, and how they're edited, how they change. And that's a big part of the discussion that's very relevant right now. It did mention this giraffe, and really the key argument was whether or not this nerve, that's in black right here, why would it go all the way down here when it only needs to travel a few inches? And the competing arguments were described in that video and described here. And they do come down in many places to say, what is your perspective? If it seems to not make any sense, does that mean that it for sure is a design error? Or maybe we're missing something that we just don't understand. There's lots of examples you'll see throughout this section of different functions of organisms that maybe we did not initially see when we learned about them, but came up as being important later. So, all right. In this section, we're going to be learning a bit about different types of tissues, and I saw a lot of you had already responded on your questions, which is great. But tissues are then these groups of cells with a common structure and function. And the four that we're going to look through are summarized here. I'm not going to go through each individual subcategory. You're reading through that and making your words, but a few things about these definitions and what they mean and some examples of them. So I wanted to highlight for epithelial. Epithelial tissue is a broad category meaning on the outside or on. The word also means before. So tissue that is typically going to be lining organs and passages through the body or the organism. Also on our surface, so skin would be, at least the surface layer would be epithelial. We saw this word as well in another idea that we'll look at today of epigenetics. Epigenetics meaning the genetics that are outside of the normal genome, where they control it from on the outside or even before you interpret the gene. And we'll get back to that term actually later in just a second. But that word epi does come in a few times, and that's a word we can use to describe that. Connective tissue, this is a very broad category of different types. The overarching definition has got cells plus some kind of fluid matrix in there. So blood has blood cells. It also has blood plasma, blood cells being the round um, donut shape that carry our oxygen and carbon dioxide around. And plasma is a mixture of different types of platelets, small pieces of um, material that help to clot blood, and other types of materials, proteins that help carry nutrients, as well as other things that are needed for that to travel around. And so connective tissue is a broad category that has a lot of different things in here. So blood, bone, fat, you see those listed on page 421, a nice diagram of different types with, in some ways, very different properties in them, but they're all lumped into the category of connective tissue. Muscle tissue is a majority of our tissues in our body. They're the ones that are responding by contracting. So they're proteins that contract throughout the life of an organism to get things working. So you think of muscles that help move our bones around, also muscles that help move our heart. Our heart is primarily a muscle. They're all over the place, and they're, again, a majority of our body's tissues. And in the nervous tissue, those are tissues that can respond to stimuli. So they sense things and they respond to them. This can be in an automatic sense. You can automatically, if you touch a hot stove, your hand will be pulled away really quickly. You're not really thinking about that. There's also the work of our brain, that our brain can think about things, can look forward to things, can remember. That's also part of our nervous system and our nervous tissue. So these are the four broad types of which any organ system, any tissue in a human body and in animals would be classified as these four types, as one of these four types that we see here. And one I want to look through, your book mentions, but I want to kind of take a step back as I look through the test and think through these things, seeing a lot of good and some misunderstanding, is getting at this question of how do cells specialize? How do they specialize? And as you, this is an option, but if you're listening to this and you look back at what you wrote for the entry task on here, is that you think through these different cells. And I asked you the question about blood and your skin. And in that example, I want you to recognize that I think I'm seeing this, is that there's a little bit of confusion about what that means to be a different cell. So I put up here in this picture, it's a little cut off, but you get the idea. You should recognize this picture here as being an image of human beings and all 46 chromosomes. So 23 pairs. Notice that this one down here, these are our sex-determining chromosomes. And these are the chromosomes that X and Y for male and XX for female. And so I want to show this picture to recognize that if you say, look at a blood cell versus that of, we'll put in a different color here, of a skin cell, okay, they both have all of these chromosomes. It's all the exact same. The difference then, and as whatever you listed in that entry task about the blood cell versus the skin cell, the difference of those two and why it is that the blood cell is a donut shape and is red and holds on to oxygen, and a skin cell is none of those things that I just said, and very different. It's tough. It is a skin that does not actually have a lot of nerve connections to it. It's used for protection. It's very, very different function, yet they all have these exact same pieces of information, is because different genes are interpreted, different genes are translated and transcribed in order to get their specific function. So I'm not looking at specific genes here, but let's just, for example, look and say that there's a gene on chromosome 1 that is needed for a skin cell, but is not needed for a blood cell. There's no reason for that particular cell in blood to transcribe and translate what's only needed for the skin cell. Whereas conversely, there might be a gene, we'll call this gene SK for skin. I made that up, but you get the idea. And let's say there's one on chromosome 14 right here that is specifically used for blood. We'll call that gene BL for blood. And in that case, that's going to be transcribed and translated only for blood cells because they're both going to make the protein that they need for those particular functions. And so the specialization that takes place is happening because of overall a word we would call, there's really two that would describe this, and this is one of our test questions, The word would be epigenetics. That means over or above the genome. Okay. And the other word we could say is gene regulation. So that's like the turning on or off genes. And why they would do this, we see more clearly in this section. So when you look at this wide variety of these 4 different types, but they even get much more specialized than that, is that the reason why they can have all this information up here the same and yet look very different is because they are choosing which genes to turn on and off, which ones to close down and regulate, and which ones to turn on. Because a blood cell does not, first of all, want to look like a skin cell, but it also doesn't want to spend all that energy to become something it never needs to use. Right? And this is, this is a very important concept as we look at these different traits of different types of cells. Okay, just want to look at a few different varieties here. Make these videos relatively short, so I'll be done here in just a minute. But when we look at epithelial cells, you see a lot of surface lining. So this is all a picture of our epithelial. Different underlying names. I want you to know a few of them that are listed in bold for this section, but all the different shapes here we will see more carefully, hopefully when we get back in person and are able to look at different tissues under the microscope. Right? We look at connective tissue. This is all a picture of our connective. You see, these are all good micrographs of these different types, and they're pretty wide variety of them, but again, they share the characteristic that they are a bunch of cells scattered throughout a matrix. And usually there's kind of a web of fibers that differs, but you for sure see that in skin and in tendons. A lot of the things that hold us physically together are going to be part of that connective tissue. All right. We also see muscle tissue. Does have some subcategories there of skeletal, cardiac, and smooth on how they look. But overall, their function is they are contracting to get something to move, whether that is blood through our blood cells, whether it's our heart and cardiac, or that's actual bones throughout our body. And then our nervous cells are primarily neurons, and neurons look very different. Just to go back to our muscle cells, look very different from these because they are carrying information. They're not storing a lot of energy. They are not carrying blood around. They're actually relatively fixed in the body. These are one of the first ones to become fixed in their function, and where they don't do anything, they don't change anymore. One of the big issues with looking at nerve cell damage is that we can't fix that very well because these cells, once they've decided to become a nervous cell, they won't change anymore. And so as you read through and think through these different functions, that's a theme that we see play out as well in here. So for today, we learned a bit about cell specialization, how these cells look different at a genetic level. We also learned about the 4 broad categories and what are some characteristics of each one of them. At this point, you should look back through your words. If you have not gotten the definitions for them, you can do that now. You could also look through and make sure those are attached on Teams. And if you're totally done, you can look at that short video that I attached about growing organs. Last thing would be to read page 423. So the introduction to organ systems and the bioengineering of organs, as you see at the bottom, same thing as the video. Any questions, as always, put them on the Teams site, especially if other people can use them, or you can email me directly. Thanks, and have a good rest of your time.